September 14th, 1943. Père Lachaise Cemetery, Paris, France. Rain falls steadily across 44 hectares of grave monuments, turning cobblestone paths into streams, drumming against marble crypts that have stood for over a century. In the deep darkness before dawn, 3 hours before curfew lifts, a funeral procession moves silently through Section 28. 6 men carry a plain wooden coffin. A priest walks ahead, clutching a breviary. Behind them, a gravedigger named Laurent Devereaux guides them toward plot 417, freshly dug the previous afternoon. The Germans watch from their checkpoint at the cemetery's main gate, 400 meters away. Oberfeldwebel Klaus Meiner raises his binoculars, focusing on the procession. Late-night funerals aren't uncommon during occupation. Families bury their dead whenever they can obtain permits. The paperwork for this one cleared through the Paris Kommandantur yesterday. Death certificate, burial authorization, plot assignment. Everything legitimate. What Meiner doesn't know, what the entire German occupation apparatus in Paris doesn't suspect, is that the coffin contains no body. Inside are 40 kilograms of British weapons, 12 Sten submachine guns, 30 magazines, and 8,000 rounds of ammunition, parachuted into France 3 nights ago, and smuggled into Paris through checkpoints that never think to search funeral vehicles carrying documented corpses. The priest isn't a priest. He's a former schoolteacher named Michel Héron who memorized enough Latin to fake last rites. The pallbearers aren't mourners. They're French resistance fighters from 3 different networks who've never met before tonight and don't know each other's real names. They only know Laurent Devereaux, the gravedigger who organized this operation, who's been turning Père Lachaise Cemetery into the largest weapons depot in occupied Paris, one funeral at a time. Laurent is 49 years old, a cemetery employee for 23 years, who understands something the Germans overlooked when they occupied Paris. Dead bodies require burial. Funerals require gravediggers. And graves, once filled, are never inspected again. The soil settles, grass grows, mourners place flowers. Nobody disturbs the dead. Nobody suspects that beneath hundreds of legitimate graves throughout Père Lachaise Cemetery, just beneath the coffins, lie wooden crates containing enough weapons to arm a battalion. The procession reaches plot 417. Laurent has positioned it carefully, Section 28, the eastern zone, far from German patrols, surrounded by 19th-century crypts, whose elaborate architecture provides cover and concealment. The plot sits between the grave of a composer who died in 1892 and a factory owner buried in 1908. Respectable dead. Unremarkable location. Perfect. The pallbearers lower the coffin beside the open grave. Michel begins prayers in badly accented Latin. Laurent lights a lantern, positioning it so the flickering light is visible from the German checkpoint. Everything must appear legitimate. Furtive behavior draws attention. A proper funeral, conducted with appropriate solemnity, is invisible. Laurent signals with his eyes. 2 men lift the coffin's lid slightly. Inside, packed in straw, the weapons gleam dully in lantern light. They work quickly, silently. The coffin is lowered into the grave, but not to the bottom. Laurent has dug this grave 2 meters deep, half a meter deeper than regulations require. The coffin rests on wooden supports he installed yesterday, suspended 1 meter below ground level. Beneath it, accessible through a false bottom in the grave itself, is a chamber containing 3 similar crates from previous burials. In 15 minutes, they'll fill the grave with earth, leaving everything looking exactly like what it claims to be, a fresh burial. Tomorrow, mourners will visit, place flowers, weep for a dead relative who never existed. In 3 days, resistance fighters will return at night, dig down 60 centimeters, remove weapons as needed, then refill and smooth the soil. From the surface, nothing appears disturbed. The Germans patrol the cemetery daily, looking for resistance activity. They never suspect the ground beneath their feet contains enough firepower to start an uprising. Michel finishes his prayers. The men begin shoveling earth. Laurent watches the German checkpoint through the darkness. No movement, no interest. Just another funeral in a city where people die every day from disease, malnutrition, and random violence. The occupation has made death routine. That routineness is Laurent's greatest weapon. What nobody knows, what even the resistance networks using Laurent's cemetery depot don't fully understand, is the scale of his operation. Over the past 11 months, Laurent has conducted 63 false funerals. 63 weapon caches are buried throughout Père Lachaise, carefully mapped, each location memorized, never written down. When the uprising comes, when Paris rises against its occupiers, Laurent can arm 500 fighters in a single night, and the Germans won't understand where the weapons came from until it's far too late. The grave fills slowly. Rain continues falling. Laurent Devereaux shovels earth with the steady rhythm of a man who's done this work for decades. Above ground, he's just a gravedigger. Below ground, he's building an arsenal. Understanding Laurent's operation requires understanding Père Lachaise cemetery itself, one of the most significant burial grounds in Europe. Established in 1804 by Napoleon Bonaparte, the cemetery covers 44 hectares in the 20th arrondissement of Paris. It contains over 70,000 graves, including those of Chopin, Balzac, Oscar Wilde, and Edith Piaf. The cemetery is a city of the dead, with streets, addresses, sections organized like urban districts. When Germany occupies Paris in June 1940, the cemetery becomes administratively complicated. The dead still require burial. French families still purchase plots. The cemetery staff continues working under German supervision. The occupiers establish rules. All burials require permits from the Paris Kommandantur. Funeral processions must observe curfew. Cemetery workers must submit daily reports on interments. The Germans believe bureaucracy prevents resistance activity. Paperwork creates accountability. Records prevent deception. Laurent Devereaux understands that the opposite is true. Proper paperwork makes deception invisible. The Germans trust their own documentation systems. A burial permit bearing official stamps and signatures isn't questioned. A death certificate processed through proper channels becomes reality. The bureaucracy designed to control actually enables sophisticated fraud. Laurent was born in Paris on November 3, 1894, the son of a stonemason who worked on cemetery monuments. He grew up in Père Lachaise, playing among the graves while his father carved inscriptions on marble headstones. He knew the cemetery better than he knew Paris itself, every path, every section, every quirk of terrain and drainage. When his father died in 1918, Laurent took a job as assistant gravedigger. By 1920, he was senior gravedigger for sections 20 through 35. His work was unglamorous but essential. Dig graves to precise specifications. 1.8 meters deep, 1 meter wide, 2.3 meters long. Ensure proper drainage. Maintain accurate records of plot locations. Lower coffins respectfully. Fill graves carefully. Keep the grounds presentable for mourners. Laurent was good at it. Methodical, reliable, invisible. Perfect qualities for what would come later. The occupation transforms everything. By August 1942, resistance networks throughout France desperately need weapons. Britain's Special Operations Executive is parachuting supplies into France, but storing and distributing weapons is nightmarishly difficult. The Germans conduct constant searches. They raid suspected safe houses. They've learned to watch for suspicious activity, unusual traffic patterns, buildings where resistance might hide equipment. A resistance organizer named Claude Beaumont approaches Laurent in September 1942. They meet in Section 47, beside the grave of a writer who died in 1936. His network has received a weapons drop, 20 rifles, but has nowhere to store them. Every safe house is compromised or under surveillance. Can Laurent help? Laurent's first response is refusal. He's not political, not a fighter. He digs graves. Beaumont persists. You know the cemetery better than anyone. The Germans patrol, but they don't search systematically. There must be somewhere we could hide equipment temporarily. Just a few days until we can move it elsewhere. Laurent thinks for 3 days. He considers the risks. Execution, if caught. Torture to reveal other resistance members. His wife Elise is 53 years old. Their daughter Marie is 28. If the Germans suspect him, his family suffers. But Laurent keeps thinking about something he saw 2 weeks earlier. A German patrol shooting a 15-year-old boy for chalking "Vive la France" on a wall. The boy's body lay in the street for 6 hours as an example. Nobody was permitted to approach, to comfort him as he died. Laurent helped bury him in a pauper's grave. Section 8. Plot 92. Laurent meets Beaumont again on September 29th. I can hide your weapons, he says, but we do it my way. No improvisation. No risks. We use the cemetery's own systems against the Germans. The technique Laurent develops is brilliantly simple. France has sophisticated death registration systems. When someone dies, a doctor issues a death certificate. The family obtains burial permits. The cemetery records the interment. Every step creates documentation. The Germans trust these records because they assume French bureaucrats follow procedures correctly. Laurent realizes he can fabricate complete documentary chains for burials that never happen. He has access to death certificate forms through his administrative duties at the cemetery. He knows which doctors might cooperate or whose signatures can be forged. He can create burial permits using official cemetery stamps. He can register graves in the cemetery's logbooks. On paper, everything appears legitimate. The only falsification is what's in the coffin. The first test happens on October 8, 1942. Laurent creates documentation for a fictional person, Jean Martin, supposedly died of tuberculosis on October 5th, aged 72. He forges a doctor's signature on the death certificate. He completes burial permit applications. He reserves plot 312 in Section 28. He informs the German administration office that a funeral is scheduled for October 8th at 0500 hours before dawn to accommodate the family's work schedules. The Germans stamp the permit. Beaumont's network provides a coffin containing 20 rifles wrapped in oilcloth. 6 resistance fighters act as pallbearers. Laurent conducts the burial exactly as regulations require, lowering the coffin, filling the grave, marking the plot, recording the interment. The Germans never question it. Why would they? The paperwork is perfect. For 2 weeks, the weapons remain buried. Then, on October 22nd, Laurent returns at night. He digs down 60 centimeters, removes 10 rifles, refills the grave. The surface shows no disturbance. To casual observation, plot 312 looks exactly like what it claims to be. The resting place of Jean Martin, dead of tuberculosis. The technique works. Beaumont's network asks for more. Laurent agrees but establishes strict rules. First, all weapons must arrive in proper coffins. The cemetery has procedures for receiving coffins. Funeral vehicles arriving with documented bodies aren't searched. Second, burials must follow normal scheduling. Random nighttime activity draws attention. Funerals during regular hours, properly documented, are invisible. Third, resistance networks cannot know the locations of other networks' caches. If one network is compromised, the others remain secure. Fourth, Laurent controls all documentation. He creates the false identities, forges the paperwork, schedules the burials. Nobody else handles administrative details. By December 1942, Laurent has conducted 9 false funerals. By March 1943, 27. He refines techniques constantly. He learns which German administrators are lazy, who stamps permits without careful review. He identifies doctors sympathetic to resistance who'll provide legitimate signatures on false death certificates. He develops relationships with coffin makers who construct containers with hidden compartments. He creates elaborate fictional backgrounds for deceased persons, copying names from old cemetery records of people buried decades ago, giving his false burials a veneer of historical legitimacy. The Germans never suspect. They see a conscientious cemetery worker filing proper paperwork, conducting funerals according to regulations, maintaining meticulous records. Laurent's administrative precision is his camouflage. Men who follow rules obsessively don't break them. The psychology is perfect. By September 1943, Laurent is coordinating with 7 different resistance networks. They don't know about each other. They only know Laurent. He's become critical infrastructure for resistance operations throughout Paris. Networks that previously struggled to store weapons now have reliable access to an expanding underground arsenal. Laurent charges nothing. He takes no payment. His compensation is simple. Every weapon he hides is a weapon that might kill Germans, might free Paris, might avenge the 15-year-old boy who bled to death for chalking words on a wall. The operation on September 14, 1943, involving the 40 kilograms of British weapons, represents Laurent's most ambitious effort yet. The weapons arrived via a special operations executive drop into a field near Chartres, 60 kilometers southwest of Paris. A resistance network smuggled them to Paris in a hearse, documents indicating the vehicle was transporting a body for burial in the family plot at Père Lachaise. German checkpoints waved them through. Nobody searches a hearse carrying a corpse. The psychology is too uncomfortable, the paperwork too tedious. Laurent has refined his false funeral procedures to an art form. The coffins appear legitimate but are constructed with false bottoms and removable panels. When pallbearers lower the coffin into Laurent's specially prepared graves, the weapons can be accessed without disturbing the coffin itself. Laurent digs his graves deeper than regulations require, creating hidden chambers beneath the official burial depth. From the surface, the graves look normal. Below, they're layered storage systems. The morning after the September 14th burial, Laurent arrives at the cemetery at his usual time, 0700 hours. He reports to the administrative office, signs the duty log, reviews the day's scheduled legitimate funerals. There are 4 actual funerals planned, real dead people requiring real burials. Laurent conducts them with the same care he applies to false funerals. The living and dead both deserve respect. His professionalism is genuine, which makes his deception undetectable. At noon, a German patrol enters Section 28. Oberleutnant Friedrich Kessler leads 6 soldiers on routine inspection. They're looking for signs of resistance activity, disturbed earth, suspicious gatherings, anything unusual. Kessler is thorough, ambitious, hoping to advance by uncovering sabotage. He walks directly past plot 417, freshly filled 12 hours earlier. The earth is packed, slightly mounded as new graves should be. A simple wooden marker identifies the deceased. Jean-Baptiste Moreau died September 12th, aged 68. Kessler doesn't stop. The grave looks exactly like hundreds of others in the cemetery. He continues his patrol, finds nothing suspicious, files a report indicating the cemetery remains secure. Laurent watches from 200 meters away, trimming hedges near Section 30. He doesn't react, doesn't acknowledge the patrol, just a cemetery worker doing his job. Below the ground beneath Kessler's boots, British Sten guns wait in darkness. The German walks over enough firepower to kill his entire patrol and never suspects. This is Laurent's genius. He doesn't defeat German security through force or cunning. He defeats it through psychology. The Germans trust bureaucracy, trust paperwork, trust their own systems. Laurent has become a master forger of reality itself, creating documentary evidence so convincing that the Germans believe his lies more than they trust their own observations. A grave with proper documentation becomes real in their administrative understanding. They stop seeing what's actually there and see only what the paperwork says should be there. By October 1943, Laurent has buried 71 weapon caches throughout Père Lachaise. He maintains a mental map of every location, never writing anything down. His memory is extraordinary, cultivated through decades of maintaining cemetery records. He knows every grave, every plot, every section. The resistance caches exist as a secondary mental map overlaying the legitimate cemetery geography. Plot 312, Section 28, 20 rifles. Plot 417, Section 28, 40 kilograms mixed weapons. Plot 631, Section 34, explosives and detonators. Plot 809, Section 42, radio equipment and crystals. The scale of the operation is staggering. If the Allies invade France, if Paris rises in rebellion, Laurent can arm hundreds of fighters in hours. He's created a distributed weapons network that's virtually impossible to eliminate. The Germans would have to dig up the entire cemetery to find all the caches. Even if they discovered one location, the others remain secure. Laurent has built redundancy into every aspect of the operation. The risk, however, is equally staggering. If the Germans discover the deception, if they capture Laurent and torture him, he can reveal 71 locations. Hundreds of resistance fighters could be arrested. Networks could be destroyed. Laurent lives with this knowledge constantly. He's made peace with the probability that he'll be caught eventually. The mathematics are brutal. Every false funeral is another roll of dice. Eventually, probability catches up. What keeps him going is simple arithmetic. Every weapon he hides is a weapon available for liberation. Every Sten gun in a false grave is a Sten gun that might kill Germans, destroy occupation infrastructure, free France. Laurent isn't fighting for ideology or politics. He's fighting because he's 49 years old, a gravedigger who spent his life dealing with death, who decided that death should at least mean something. If he dies, at least his death will have purchased something valuable. Weapons, hope, revenge. November 11th, 1943. Armistice Day, the anniversary of the end of the First World War. The Germans prohibit public commemorations, but Parisians mark the day privately. Laurent conducts 3 false funerals. The irony isn't lost on him. On the day meant to honor the dead from the last war, he's burying weapons for the next battle. The cemetery is filling with both corpses and guns. Death and resistance occupy the same ground. The largest cache Laurent hides that day contains 70 kilograms of equipment: British plastic explosives, detonators, fuse wire, timing mechanisms. A resistance network specializing in railway sabotage needs long-term storage until operations begin. Laurent buries the explosives in Section 49, Plot 1012, beneath the coffin of a fictional woman named Marie Claudette Rousseau, supposedly died of heart failure, aged 76. The paperwork is perfect. The German administration stamps the burial permit without question. 3 days later, a German engineering unit conducts ground-penetrating surveys in Section 49, looking for potential underground voids that might indicate resistance tunnels. They scan within 30 meters of Plot 1012. The survey detects nothing unusual. The grave appears as solid earth with a coffin-shaped density anomaly at proper depth. The Germans never think to check below the coffin. Their assumption is that graves contain only bodies and earth. They're looking for tunnels, hidden rooms, not burial plots used as storage. Laurent's technique exploits the fundamental assumption that graves are what they claim to be. By December 1943, Laurent is conducting an average of 5 false funerals per week. The workload is exhausting. He must maintain his regular duties, supervise actual burials, maintain cemetery grounds, while simultaneously running a sophisticated forgery and smuggling operation. His wife, Elise, knows something is wrong. Laurent comes home exhausted, hands blistered from digging extra graves, expression haunted. He tells her nothing. Knowledge is danger. If the Germans arrest her, she can't reveal what she doesn't know. Their daughter Marie is more perceptive. She works as a nurse at Hôtel Dieu Hospital, treating patients, including resistance fighters brought in with gunshot wounds. She sees the patterns, understands the underground war being fought. One evening in mid-December, she confronts her father. "You're helping them, aren't you? The resistance." Laurent denies nothing, confirms nothing. His expression says everything. Marie nods slowly. "Be careful, Papa. The Germans are animals. If they catch you, they'll kill you slowly." Laurent knows. He's seen what the Gestapo does to captured resistance members. Bodies dumped in the cemetery with marks of torture, broken fingers, cigarette burns. Worse. He buries these bodies in paupers' graves, documenting the atrocities in his own way. January 1944 brings the coldest winter in decades. The cemetery freezes. Ground becomes rock hard. Digging graves is brutal work, requiring pickaxes to break frozen earth. Laurent's hands bleed. His back aches constantly. He's 49 years old, doing the physical work of a man half his age. But the false funerals continue. Weather provides cover. Fewer German patrols in freezing rain. Fewer inspections when snow blankets the cemetery. Laurent uses the weather tactically, scheduling high-risk burials during the worst storms. On January 23rd, he conducts a burial during a blizzard. Visibility is 30 meters. The pallbearers can barely see the grave. They lower a coffin containing 60 kilograms of weapons, British Lee Enfield rifles and ammunition. The ceremony takes 9 minutes. They're gone before German patrols notice. The next morning, snow covers the fresh grave. By afternoon, it's indistinguishable from surrounding terrain. The weapons wait beneath winter silence. February brings increased German security. The occupation authorities suspect major resistance activity is being planned. They increase patrols, expand checkpoint searches, interrogate civilians randomly. The Gestapo arrests suspected resistance members throughout Paris. Under torture, some reveal safe house locations, weapons, caches, operational details. But nobody knows about Laurent's cemetery operation because the networks are compartmentalized. The fighters receiving weapons don't know where they're stored before distribution. They meet Laurent at predetermined locations, receive equipment, disappear. No names, no locations, no records. On February 16, 1944, Laurent has a close call. A Gestapo officer named Hauptsturmführer Werner Koch begins investigating cemetery operations. Koch is methodical, intelligent, dangerous. He reviews burial records for the past year, comparing death certificates against cemetery logs. He's looking for patterns, anomalies, anything suggesting fraudulent activity. Koch notices something interesting. The cemetery has processed 463 burials in the past year. Of these, 73 occurred outside normal hours, early morning or late evening funerals, supposedly accommodating families' work schedules. Koch finds this statistically unusual. Why so many irregular funerals? He summons Laurent to Gestapo headquarters on Rue des Saussayes. The interview occurs in a windowless room. Koch sits behind a metal desk. 2 guards stand by the door. Laurent remains calm. Fear is confession. Confidence is innocence. Coke asks about burial scheduling. Why so many funerals at unusual hours? Laurent explains patiently. During occupation, families work long hours in factories, labor battalions. They can't attend funerals during normal business hours. The cemetery accommodates their schedules. It's compassionate policy. Nothing suspicious. Coke isn't satisfied. He produces specific examples. Jean Martin, buried October 8, 1942 at 0500 hours. Marie Claudette Rousseau, buried November 11, 1943 at 0430 hours. 10 other cases, all early morning, all supposedly for families' convenience. Coke wants names of family members who attended. Laurent has prepared for this. He maintains false records, not just for the deceased but for fictional family members. He provides names, addresses. Most are real addresses of bombed buildings, destroyed in Allied raids, where records were lost. The families supposedly moved away after losing their homes. Untraceable. Coke writes everything down. The interview lasts 2 hours. Laurent never wavers. His story is consistent, detailed, boring. He's a bureaucrat explaining bureaucratic procedures. Coke grows frustrated. He wants conspiracy, finds only administrative tedium. Finally, Coke dismisses him with a warning. We're watching, Devereaux. If we discover any irregularities, you'll be arrested. Laurent walks out of Gestapo headquarters at 1430 hours. He doesn't shake. He doesn't run. He walks at normal pace back to the cemetery. But he knows the operation has to evolve. The Germans are looking now. Koch is dangerous. One mistake and everything collapses. Laurent makes a decision. No more false funerals for 30 days. Let German scrutiny pass. Let Coke investigate and find nothing. The existing caches are sufficient for immediate needs. Better to wait than to risk exposure. He informs the resistance networks through dead drops, coded messages left in cemetery graves. The pipeline stops temporarily. The networks understand. Security trumps supply. March 1944 passes slowly. Coke's investigation continues. The Gestapo interviews doctors who signed death certificates, checks addresses Laurent provided, reviews cemetery financial records looking for evidence of bribes or payments. They find nothing because there's nothing to find. Laurent took no money. The doctors who helped believed they were expediting legitimate burials. The addresses are real. The residents genuinely displaced by bombing. Coke's investigation produces extensive documentation of cemetery procedures that appear completely legitimate. By early April, Coke gives up. His report concludes the cemetery operations are clean. Burial irregularities reflect wartime disruptions, nothing more. The Gestapo moves on to other investigations. Laurent has survived, but the experience ages him. He looks 60, not 49. Gray hair, deep lines, constant exhaustion. On April 20th, 1944, Laurent resumes false funerals. The 30-day pause actually helped. German attention has shifted elsewhere. The cemetery appears thoroughly investigated and cleared. It's now the last place they'll look for resistance activity. The pause was brilliant camouflage. Between April and June 1944, Laurent conducts 31 false funerals. He's preparing for something he feels coming. Allied invasion. Everyone senses it. German troops are being moved to coastal defenses. Resistance networks receive coded BBC radio messages indicating imminent action. Paris will rise when the Allies land. Laurent wants his arsenal ready. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces land in Normandy. The news spreads through Paris instantly despite German censorship. People know. Laurent hears while digging a legitimate grave for an old woman who died of pneumonia. A mourner whispers the news. The Allies have landed. It's begun. The next 8 weeks are chaos. German occupation forces tighten control while simultaneously preparing for evacuation. Resistance networks launch sabotage operations. The Gestapo arrests hundreds. Street fighting erupts sporadically. Paris becomes a powder keg waiting to explode. Laurent continues his work. The cemetery keeps filling, both with real dead from the violence and false graves containing weapons. August 15th, 1944. Resistance leadership in Paris decides the city will rise before the Allies arrive. An uprising will demonstrate French self-liberation. Orders go out to all networks. Prepare for general insurrection. Weapons are needed immediately. Hundreds of fighters must be armed. Laurent receives word through his network contact. The time has come. He meets resistance commanders in the cemetery at midnight on August 17th. 30 fighters gather in Section 42. Laurent hands them a map he's drawn from memory. 93 locations across the cemetery, each marked with a number indicating cache contents. Weapons, ammunition, explosives, radio equipment, everything buried over 2 years of false funerals. The commanders stare at the map in disbelief. You've been hiding all of this here, under German noses, for 2 years. Yes. How did they never find it? Because they trusted paperwork more than their instincts. How much is here? Enough to arm 400 fighters. More if we're careful with distribution. The commanders look at each other. This changes everything. August 19th, 1944. The Paris Uprising begins. Resistance fighters seize police stations, attack German patrols, erect barricades. The fighting is desperate. German forces have tanks, artillery, superior numbers. The resistance has courage and, thanks to Laurent Devereaux, weapons. Throughout that night and the following days, fighters come to Père Lachaise in small groups. Laurent guides them to cache locations. They dig quickly, retrieve weapons, disappear into the city. Plot 312, Section 28. 20 rifles passed to fighters heading to the Latin Quarter. Plot 417, Section 28. 40 kilograms of British weapons distributed to groups defending the Marais. Plot by plot, the cemetery yields its hidden arsenal. The Germans realize something is happening. Patrols increase. They find fresh digging in multiple cemetery sections but arrive too late. The weapons are gone. They suspect the cemetery has been used for storage but can't understand the mechanism. How did weapons get buried in registered graves? The concept is too audacious to immediately grasp. On August 23rd, Oberleutnant Kessler, the same officer who patrolled past Laurent's caches months earlier, finally understands. He orders systematic excavation of recently buried graves. By then, it's too late. Most caches have been emptied. The few remaining contain only older equipment, obsolete rifles, corroded ammunition. The useful material is already in fighters' hands throughout Paris. August 25th, 1944. General Dietrich von Choltitz, German military governor of Paris, surrenders the city rather than destroy it. Free French armored forces enter Paris. The uprising succeeds. The cost has been high. Over 1,500 resistance fighters killed, 3,000 wounded. But Paris is liberated, and a significant portion of the fighters who survived were armed with weapons Laurent Devereaux buried in false graves over 2 years. Laurent doesn't celebrate. On the morning of August 26th, he returns to work. There are bodies to bury, real bodies now. Fighters killed in the liberation, Germans executed by resistance, collaborators shot without trial. The cemetery continues receiving the dead. Laurent digs graves with the same methodical care he always has. The living and dead both deserve respect. In September 1944, Free French authorities interview Laurent about his resistance work. They want to award him medals, recognition. He refuses. "I'm just a gravedigger," he tells them. "I did what I could," they insist. He relents, accepts a citation, files it away, never displays it. His reward was simpler. Paris is free. The dead can rest. His work is done. Laurent continues working at Père Lachaise until 1962, when arthritis finally forces retirement. He dies on March 8, 1969, aged 74. His funeral is well attended. Resistance veterans come, old fighters who carried Laurent's buried weapons into battle. They understand his contribution in ways official histories never will. He's buried in Section 28, Plot 312, the same location where he buried his very first weapon cache on October 8, 1942. The symmetry pleases him. In death, he returns to where the operation began. The final count, compiled years later by historians, remains imprecise. Laurent conducted between 93 and 106 false funerals between October 1942 and August 1944. These burials concealed an estimated 470 kilograms of weapons and equipment. During the Paris Uprising, approximately 60% of resistance fighters who engaged German forces carried weapons originally stored in Laurent's cemetery caches. The operation armed the liberation of Paris. What remains remarkable isn't the scale, but the simplicity. Laurent possessed no military training, no explosives expertise, no combat experience. He was a cemetery worker who understood bureaucracy, documentation, and the psychology of trust. He defeated German security not through force but through paperwork so perfect the occupiers believed his lies. In doing so, he proved that resistance takes many forms. Sometimes the most effective warriors are those who fight with shovels and forge documents, turning graveyards into arsenals and making the dead serve the living one last time. Paris was freed by many heroes. Laurent Devereaux was among them, though few will ever know his name. The graves keep his secrets still,